Happy election day on my movie loving maniacs. This is your boy Bankful B of the Lassiter Factor, and I hope everyone is doing their part and going out to go vote today. Now, look, I'm not going to tell you who you should vote for because one, that's your business. Two, I don't normally talk about politics. That's not really my thing. I leave that to more qualified individuals. But I do ask that you make an informed decision when choosing the next president. But I am going to take a moment to talk about one of my favorite comedies of all time that I like to watch during times like this, and that is Head of State, which is the directorial debut of Chris Rock that came out 21 years ago. And of course, it stars Chris Rock and the late Bernie Mac. And I rewatched it a couple of nights ago, so let's review. So, Head of State stars Chris Rock as Mace Gillian. He's an alderman from Washington, D.C., and he is chosen to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And this movie pretty much shows how he goes through the whole candidate process, debating the other party, but it's also a hilarious take on a black man running for president. Now, like I said, this is one of my favorite comedies of all time for a lot of reasons. I remember when I rented this from Blockbuster back in the day, me and my dad watched it. It was one of the funniest things we ever experienced together. But it also has a special place in my heart because this was basically my introduction kind of into politics. Because I was a preteen at the time when this movie came out. It was the first election that I ever saw because a year later from when this movie came out, we had the election of George Bush versus John Kerry. And to me, that was probably the earliest election that I ever really experienced because during the 90s, I don't really remember the Bill Clinton election or any other election prior to George Bush versus John Kerry. I vividly remember George Bush versus Al Gore, but George Bush versus John Kerry was really the first election that I was actually present and mentally focused for on. All I'm saying is this movie was basically my introduction into running for president and candidacy. It showed me how running for president worked in a way. But it was also hilarious because at the time when this movie came out, the possibility of a black man running for president seemed like an impossibility. This movie came out 5 years before Obama ran for president. But how do I feel about this movie 21 years later? I still think it's funny. I do think it's imperfect, but it always has a special place in my heart, and god damn it, it is a funny ass movie. And Chris Rock is a huge part of that because, like I said, this was his first movie that he ever directed. After this, he made I Think I Love My Wife, which is another one of my favorite comedies of all time, but we'll get to that at a much, much later time. And then he made Top 5. But this was his introduction into filmmaking. And I even read that one of his inspirations of why he wanted to make this movie is that he said that during the 1984 Democratic presidential nominee was Walter Mandel, and he chose Geraldine Ferrara, who was a woman, as his running mate. And the Democrats knew they had little chance of defeating Ronald Reagan, but selected Ferrara in hopes of gaining the female support. But I also believe that comedy comes from truth, and there is some truth in, at the time, a black man running for president. One of my favorite jokes in this movie is when they go to Mace Gillum and they tell him that they want him to run for president, and the first thing on his mind is he's going to get shot. And let's be real, that's what we were all thinking, and that's in a way where we were all afraid what would happen to President Barack Obama. But it's the fact that we can find the humor in that because comedy does come from truth. And Chris Rock, he even has a moment where he talks to Dylan Baker, I should say, who's on the campaign with Mace Gilliam, and he tells him straight up like, "You are so lucky. You just gotta represent yourself. Me, I represent my entire race." And if I quit now, there may not be another black candidate for another 50 years. Of all the funny stuff that's happening in this movie, it's nice that this movie has a moment to acknowledge that, and it keeps the movie slightly grounded in reality. Now, like I just said, Dylan Baker and Lynn Whitfield, they're both in this movie. They run the campaign for Mace Gillian. And at first they were trying to they wanted him just so he could really lose. So that they could have some chance of winning the next election. But then Mace Gillian, he just comes in and just completely takes over. Now, again, the late Bernie Mac, he is in this movie, and it's just bittersweet because, like, anytime I revisit this movie, and really any movie with Bernie Mac, I'm reminded that he is no longer with us, and then I just get sad because I really do miss him, and especially in this day and age, given the state of the world, I would have loved to hear his take on the state of the world right now. But Bernie Mac, he is truly the star of this movie because he comes in almost halfway through the movie and he tells Maze like they're basically like these aren't your words. We want to hear what you we want to hear your words, and then he basically spoke life into Mace Gillian. Chris Rock gives the whole "that ain't right" speech. In fact, I remember he started that speech by saying, "How many of you work two jobs just to have enough money to be broke?" I felt like he was speaking to me personally when he said that. I was like, "Well, yes, I do." You got Nick Searcy in the movie, who is running against Mace Gilliam in the movie. God bless America and no place else. I am a war hero and I'm Sharon Stone's cousin. He is hilarious in this movie, and he's basically is your typical Republican, or at least a satirical take on a Republican. Robin Givens plays the ex-girlfriend in the movie, and she had a meta moment in the movie where Chris Rock was about to beat her, and then she turns around and says, "I wish you would," which I guess is alluding to how Mike Tyson used to beat her. And Tamala Jones, she's in this movie, and she's the love interest of Chris Rock in this movie. I love her here. Stephanie March, she has a funny bit in this movie where she's basically the head of Eternal Legions. Basically, she's there. The Democratic not the Democratic Party, they got tired of getting caught up in scandals, so they hired someone to basically cater to any sexual needs that Mace Gillian has in the movie, and that's just funny in itself. Tracy Morgan, he has a small role in this movie where he just sells meats, but really he's forgettable in this movie, at least in my opinion. Another person who is no longer with us is Nate Dogg, and he's basically the musical narrator of this movie, and I thought that's just creative in itself. And as for hilarious moments in this movie that I couldn't find the right segue into it, I love the dance party at that party they're at, and Chris Rock he completely takes over. They start playing "Hot in Here" by Nelly, and then he says, the roof is on fire," and then one of the ladies goes, "Ah, the roof is on fire." Mace Gilliam, he talks to the LGBTQ community and he tells them, "Don't worry, I will take good care of you because when I see gay people, I see regular Americans just like everybody else." And just hearing that, I'm like, it's funny. I wish people of today would recognize that. And then he followed that up with talking to pimps and hoes and talking about, "I will take care of everybody, the pimp business and the hoe business." He even addresses school shootings in this movie, which was a very real thing at the time when this movie came out. And then the debate, which is also a funny bit in this movie. Look, there's so many good moments in this movie, hilarious moments. I could talk about this movie all day, but if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a good movie to watch around election time. It's a nice time capsule of a movie. It's a nice little movie on Chris Rock's resume. It's a nice movie on Bernie Mac's resume. I will always have a spot in my heart for this movie for a number of reasons, and that is why I'm going to give Head of State the hard eyes emoji. Thank y'all so much for watching. This is your boy Bankful B of the Lassiter Factor. Stay safe, wash your hands, peace, and of course, don't forget to go out and vote.